I'm Claire Edwards, and you're listening to Authentic Leadership, a series of conversations, insights, and inspirations with leaders who are real, raw, and authentic. I have no doubt that you'll be engaged from the get-go as I bring you a conversation about leading with both influence and integrity that I had with Bill Sullivan of Salesforce. In the true spirit of authenticity, Bill lets us into both his professional and personal life, sharing stories of his experiences in the military and how leaders and mentors who inspired him have influenced his leadership philosophy. From tours of duty in Afghanistan to leading and inspiring a team in the commercial world, enjoy your time with Sully. Bill Sullivan's personal journey and impressive career epitomise the essence of resilience and thriving in challenge and change. Sully served in various leadership capacities as a jet and helicopter pilot in the United States Air Force for 24 years, 13 of which were flying a Pavehawk helicopter in a search and rescue role. He also completed 4 combat tours in the Middle East as a member of the Air Combat Command and Air Force Special Operations Command. When I first met Bill, it was in the capacity of a fellow speaker with a common interest, actually passion, about resilience. And what started to emerge for me, though, was how Bill was communicating with me. I could see and experience how influential he was, and at the same time a person of absolute integrity and ethics. So whilst there could be so many different topics I could interview Bill on, it's this one as the influential leader. I believe a trait that is probably still quite rare, and we're recording this in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, one that I believe is absolutely necessary. Bill now lives in Australia with his lovely family and is a senior sales manager with Salesforce. Bill, welcome to Authentic Leadership.
Thanks so much, Claire. I'm so excited to speak with you today.
Oh, not as excited as I am, I tell you. So listen, Bill, before we actually dive into our topic, just going from the introduction, I suspect that our listeners are already as curious as I am to find out more about how on earth you transitioned from being a jet and helicopter pilot in the military to a corporate career and in a sales capacity. I'm sure there must be some correlations there somewhere. So I'm just going to shut up and hand over to you.
Sure. And that is an interesting one. And so it actually goes back to my Aussie wife. We met in Tokyo back in 1998. And we basically agreed at that point that I still had, at that point, about 16 years left of active duty service till I could retire to the Air Force. So it may as well have been a prenuptial agreement that she'd agree to kind of follow me around till I could retire, and then we'd make the ultimate move to Sydney. So back in 2014, I kind of kept my promise there and made the move here to Australia as kind of a one-way ticket. And it's been a wonderful transition in many ways. But part of that was like, okay, I finished my first half professionally, and what am I going to try to do with my second half? And there was basically 2 things I loved about my time in the Air Force. One was flying. And that, though I felt a degree of closure when I retired, I kind of got through my experiences there in one piece, mentally and physically, and kind of felt like I didn't necessarily want to press my luck there. What was the other thing that I absolutely loved? It was people leadership. So I'm like, okay, how do I kind of try to replicate that side of things? And what I found, interestingly, is probably 90% of the skills that I developed through the years as a commander in the Air Force translated very directly to leading a team in the corporate world.
Wow. Okay. So thinking about the Air Force and the corporate world, people leadership, leading with integrity, leading with values. There must be times when you've been challenged in a corporate sphere compared to, I suppose, and I'm mind reading here, the discipline and the absolute values of the military. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. There is, and people ask me this a lot, like, gosh, didn't you just like kind of give out orders in the military and people just kind of followed along? And although we have that, kind of tool in the tool bag if we need to, you're never going to be an
Hmm.
effective leader if you're relying on orders and military hierarchy to kind of influence your team. It really comes down to the same fundamental values where you're trying to motivate and inspire people to want to kind of follow you. And in as
Yeah.
much, yes, and sometimes it's, you could argue that it's harder because you don't have that kind of hierarchical kind of requirement by the Uniform Code of Military Justice. But I can't remember a single time in my 24 years in the Air Force that I said this is an order. It was always one of those deals where you just tried to, again, to try to lead a team in such a fashion that they wanted to kind of follow you into battle, or to just accomplish what you're trying to achieve in the corporate world. So there are elements that are kind of unique, but I'd say there's the vast majority of them are the same, and it's just trying to, again, rally a team around a common cause, and get to know each kind of person on your team individually, figure out kind of what motivates
Mm.
them, and help them get to achieve their personal and professional goals to the max extent possible. So again, although there is some elements of it that's unique, I'd say the vast majority of kind of the lessons learned and the leadership methodologies have translated very
Yeah.
directly. Mm.
So it sounds like the thread that's running through this is democratized leadership. That
That
it's a
that that
collaborative form of leadership.
that's absolutely fair, and I think the whole concept of it, and that's another interesting thing that I think is a misnomer from the military, that everything is more almost dictatorial, like, do this
Mm.
because I'm a lieutenant colonel or what have you. I found that to be absolutely not the case. It's one of those deals that, I operated as you mentioned, for 13 years of my career, a crew helicopter. We had a co-pilot, we had an aerial gunner, we had a flight engineer, we had 2 to 3 pararescue men in the back of the aircraft. And yes, there were times as the aircraft commander where I had to make a decisive, immediate decision, but more frequently, I had the opportunity to solicit inputs from my entire crew, and I would kind of compile those inputs and make an ultimate decision. And I've
Hmm.
tried to utilize that same technique in the way I operate with my team in the sales capacity, where whenever possible, when we're trying to guide the team in a certain direction, I solicit inputs from the team, and then we kind of come up with a solution after we've kind of all put our heads together.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that in terms of decision making and that sort of ethical influencing, where yes, the buck stops with you, but you have to bring these people with you. Do you have any examples from, firstly, from your military career, and then more recently in your corporate career, where
Hmm.
you've had to deal with someone who is really strongly resisting a decision that has to be made, or a direction that people are taking, and what was the process that you used to go about ensuring that inclusion, but still the
Hmm.
decision had to be made?
Absolutely, and it was interesting. Probably the first example that comes to mind is when I first started as a sales leader. I had a unique transition where the very first corporate role I had was as a corporate director, or a commercial director. So I was leading a team of sales professionals that many of them had been in the career field for 10 or 15 years. So it was trying to, I guess, establish a degree of credibility in a career
Mm.
path that I hadn't really had the background in. So really there was, I can think of a couple guys in particular that there was a degree of resistance initially, but really what it stemmed, kind of led it back to is respect, and mutual respect, and trying to establish up front that, hey, I'm not kind of pretend to have the expertise in your career field, but this is what I can bring to the fold. And it was oftentimes, again, about trying to knock down barriers, that they were in this thing
Mm.
together, and just trying to establish that up front, that, again, this isn't us working, kind of in two separate silos, but rather we're a team working through these challenges in a unified fashion, I guess. So once we, kind of broke through that initial barrier of okay, wait a sec, this individual didn't work his way up through my career field, but he can bring kind of a unique perspective to the challenges I face. We ended up working very effectively together, and in as much that's kind of, I think, one of the fun parts of leadership, but one of the very large challenges is everybody's wired differently. So how do you appeal
Yeah.
to their individual needs but still create an overall kind of culture and ethos around the wider team? So that was really one of the biggest challenges I faced personally, was establishing that credibility when it wasn't a linear career path I had to get to my position.
That's so important. And I think, when certainly from my perspective, when I've had a boss or a leader who is sort of ticking the boxes on inclusion, and it's like you can just read through. It's not ethical influencing at all. You're just trying to manipulate us.
Sure.
You can
No.
there's like it's like we have a radar for manipulation. Would you agree?
Oh, you can read through that so fast. And the other thing that is so important to me is, I think people either manage up or manage down, and you can kind of see through that pretty quickly too. If you really
Mm,
care more about, impressing your boss, or you truly care about your team. And what I've always found is, if you truly care about your team, you're gonna achieve the most for your boss anyway at the end of the day. But like,
absolutely.
I think team members can see through that so quickly, if if the empathy, if the concern, if the care is genuine or not. So that's something that
Yeah.
I you can't fake that. And I think if you're, I guess, almost lucky enough to have that at your core, then I think team members rally around that as well, if they know that, again, we're in this together. And I think that there's
Yeah.
one overarching thing I've always tried to do, is make sure that the team realizes that. And again, with what is going on right now, it's never been more important. And making sure that they feel kind of, I don't know, supported through such a difficult time.
Yeah, I'm really curious about this, Bill. And actually, I did want to
Mhm.
say that when we met, that's what came
Mhm.
across to me is your absolute deep caring for your people. It's
Yeah.
just it's there. It's you absolutely can't fake that. But so the current situation is we are
Mm,
what date are we here today? It's the 8th of April, where we're all sort of
mm.
still flying blind a little bit. Pardon the flying pun, but we are flying blind a little bit, and we're trying to get used to the new normal. You're leading a team in an organization that is still operating. So again, forgive my ignorance in here, but you've got teams of people. You've got a great product that your people need to sell this product and achieve their targets, and they're in the same sort of crazy situation that we're in. How the heck are you leading them through this?
Sure. And it is interesting. One of the big things that we went to was daily catch-ups at very first thing in the morning. And at first, to be honest, yeah, I had a little bit of resistance with that, because there's a little bit of a concern there was a big brother type of thing. But what we
Mm-hmm.
found is people really were missing that connection. And the way we've run the meetings currently is, we literally, I don't even get into the meat of it for the first maybe 10 minutes or so. I just get people, it's almost like a virtual coffee, in the morning, where
Yeah,
everyone's just trying to, kind of just have those connections that are so, I don't know, almost challenging to maintain in our current environment, and
yeah,
and I think that's probably the number one thing, is to do our darndest to not lose those human connections, and again, to make sure that everyone feels that they are still very much supported, not only from myself but from their peers. I really,
mm,
and another massive thing I believe in, and it's maybe a little bit cliche, but the whole being greater than the individual parts, and just making sure that
yeah.
everyone very much still feels that in the current environment. So that's probably the number one thing I've tried to do, is maintain that connectivity and the frequent check-ins. Some organizations have little games they're playing daily and stuff, and there's times and places for that. I think we are doing a pub trivia every Friday, which has been kind of fun. um, but
Mm-hmm.
but by and large, it's just that kind of routine connectivity that we're just so fortunate with modern technology that we have that opportunity to actually
Yeah.
have the the face to face, virtually of course, but nonetheless to see each other. We actually, that's another
Mm.
thing that we're making a very conscious effort to. We open up our video screens to make sure that, again, there's that human connection. We kind of give each other little tours around the home, things like that, to just
Oh,
make sure that
good.
that human connection, yeah, there's still very much that human connection that I think, again, to me, when I talk about the way I try to lead, like, kind of that personal relationship is always at the core of it. And if
Yeah.
we truly care about the people to our right and to our left, we can cover each other's gaps. We can achieve the most in terms of performance at the end of the day. But it's just a heck of a lot more fun to operate way to operate as well. And again, I don't think it's ever been more challenging, but also I don't think it's ever been more important.
Yeah. Actually,
Mm.
I'd like to just park the topic of influence for a moment, because uh, you speak a lot on resilience. You have a phenomenal background story and experience in how you built your resilience, and I'm just wondering, how are you using everything that you've learned to be who you are today, um,
Mhm.
to help your team, to ride this roller coaster? What are you using from your own experience to help them build their resilience?
Sure. Um, there's, I always talk about, I kind of referred to the people piece already. The other ones I always talk about are it's the three P's for me. It's people, process, and perspective. The process
Yeah.
one's kind of, it's just, that's what we've been trying to do a lot. And that's the one that's less glamorous, I guess, but it's just making sure you're doing the right things consistently process wise, which again is even more important in the virtual world. So that's one of the things I've continued to try to emphasize is the routines, like, in the current
Yeah.
environment. But the one I'd probably like to focus on particularly is the perspective piece, and that's the one that I have, I guess, the luxury and also the burden of my previous experiences that helped me with that a lot. And it's both personal and professional, I guess. On
Hmm.
the personal side, I had a brutal year back in 2010 when I lost my mom and my dad and my brother in a 9.5 month period. And I allude a lot to that with folks, and partially because, some people would prefer to kind of keep that behind them, but for me it's a chance to kind of honor their memory, when I have a chance to talk about mom and dad and Jim, and the influence
Hmm.
they had on me. and and I guess my brother Jim is an ultimate example of this. He was the best athlete in our family. He held the school pole vault record for a decade. He was an amazing extreme skier, a an amazing motorcycle, like you know, he was just, one of those all around studs. And
Wow.
2 days before his 18th, yeah, and two days before his 18th birthday back in 1979, he severed his spinal cord and became a quadriplegic. And he was one of those guys that was always so active. He was actually training to be a jet mechanic. He was amazing with his hands, and all of a sudden he didn't have use of his hands anymore, and couldn't, let alone he couldn't even walk. And he had to reinvent himself, and he did. He learned how to drive a specially modified van, drove 4,000 kilometers across America, went to school in Arizona, came back to our hometown in New Hampshire, and became a community giant. Instituted women's pole vault in our state, became president of the school board, and just didn't complain. He just was one of those guys that just took the chips that he was dealt and made the most of them, and spent the next 30 years in a wheelchair, just making a massive difference, a massive impact. And then for no good reason, he developed lung cancer at the age of 48 back in 2010, and was gone 6 months later. And it was absolutely devastating to our family. But I tell you, he was one of these individuals that just lived his life right and made it impossible for me to ever complain, or, in any way,
Yeah.
shape, or form. And he was just the ultimate example to me of what true courage is like, and positivity and gratefulness. And he's just such an influence to me. So it's really helped me with perspective in that sense. And I guess on the professional side, in my career as a combat rescue helicopter pilot, in the 20 years I was an active duty flyer, we lost 40 people from my community, 20 of whom were in my immediate unit at the time, whether they were shoot downs or midair collisions or whatever the case may be. And
Oof.
probably equally tragically, we've lost 4 of my previous coworkers to the mental injuries they suffered through suicide since I've been here in Australia. So I guess for me, I just feel so fortunate that I got through all those experiences kind of mentally and physically in one piece. And
Hmm.
and it's helped me in terms of perspective. I often say to my team right now, honestly, with the challenges we're facing, no one's shooting at us, and no one's likely to perish on my team today. So that's 2 things I couldn't say in my last career field,
Wow.
like, and not to mention my brother's example in terms of courage and positivity and gratefulness that's just afforded me that opportunity for true perspective. So if I had to choose like kind of one key phrase that's helped me, it's perspective.
Oh,
Hmm.
absolutely. Gosh. Um,
Hmm.
so sorry to hear that, and also, it's so inspiring to hear about how you're paying honor to his legacy. And you've just shared a hugely impactful story with us, and I know, as often happens on this podcast, we go off on tangents from what we were planning to speak about, but the power of story, Bill. You know, how have you used, or how do you use and share stories with your team, and do you encourage them to share their stories?
Absolutely, absolutely. And one thing I found, I do these kind of resilience talks fairly frequently. It's one of these things that, to me, the biggest power of it. Well, there's a couple. One is I always try to hopefully have everyone leave with a couple tools to kind of
Hmm.
attack whatever challenges they face ahead with a few extra kind of kind of different things that they can use to face the challenges that's ahead of them. But equally important to me is I found it's opened other people up, and so many times after we have a conversation like you and I just had, someone shares something in their own personal life that they've kind of kept bottled up for whatever reason
Yeah,
previously and hadn't felt comfortable to share. And that's something that I take a great deal of pride in, is allowing folks that opportunity to be authentic, to kind of share, kind of what's inside, a little bit more than they
yeah,
may have felt empowered to do otherwise. And that's probably the biggest thing for me that I found is beneficial about being kind of open with the challenges that we faced in the past.
yeah.
And I tell you, when I've had that opportunity to tell these stories and people have shared things that they were struggling with otherwise, it just is so gratifying to me, because I'm like, okay, there's a point to the things we're trying to do here.
Mm. Oh, hugely. I mean, you're role modeling what I call courageous vulnerability. You're giving them permission to be their authentic selves as well. And I think this is one of the pillars of 21st century leadership. Is it's not necessarily about leaving your emotions at the door, because it's the whole person who comes to work, and the whole person who needs to be considered.
Absolutely, and again, I talk about moments of kind of gratefulness for me when you've been able to help people. And it's interesting when you and I were discussing the different kind of ways we want to go with this conversation. One of the questions you had
Hmm.
asked me about was an example where it was a challenge to be, I guess, leading with integrity kind of won at the end of the day, and where it wasn't easy to go there. And it
Yeah,
actually made me think, if you don't mind, I'll share kind of a story along those lines that I
I'd
hadn't
love you
thought
to,
about in a long
please.
time. And it was back in, let me get the year right. It was 2002. So we had just
Hmm.
basically, September 11th had happened kind of recently, and we found ourselves over in Kandahar, Afghanistan, executing the combat rescue mission for downed fighter pilots and or men or women that were injured in firefights and needed a ride home. And I was sitting there in the Tactical Operations Center in Kandahar, And my commanding officer was based in Karshi-Kanabad, Uzbekistan, and he called me with the news that one of the members of my team's father had passed away, kind of unexpectedly. And we were in this tactical operations center in Afghanistan there, and he's like, "Can you hand the phone to this individual?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to have you tell him his dad died in front of 30 people here, with no idea how he's going to react." And
Yeah.
it was a really kind of almost heated discussion. He's like, I'm the commander here. I need to do this. I'm like, no, I need to do this. This is my guy, my friend. I know I'm second in command over here right now, but I need to do this. And
Mm.
we had a bit of a back and forth, and he eventually agreed to give me that opportunity. And it was one of the most difficult things I ever did, but one of the most important things I ever did. And I just remember so distinctly pulling this gentleman to the side, and we went for a walk, and I just turned around and then I said, we lost your father today. And he wrote me recently in the past year about it. This is like, that would have been 18 years ago now. And he's
Oh.
like, he was really thankful, and he just said, "I'll never forget that moment." And he said, in the moment, he actually wanted to punch me. He said, he was just so
Oh.
overcome with emotion, he didn't want to hear that word, but that his dad had died. But he was so genuinely thankful that I just like I just gave him that moment to process it with
Yeah.
just the two of us, and we just hugged each other, and it was, I don't know, it was an example to me of just, you have these moments in your life where you have, it can go a couple different ways, and you have to try to,
Hmm.
with all the things that you've learned through your life, how to handle these situations. And that was one where I think everything that I had learned about it through to my life to that point, kind of, you have these moments where you have to kind of harken upon everything you've learned. And that was one for me where kind of trying
Yeah.
to try to be an influential leader and lead with integrity was kind of really important, I think. And I just want to share that story with you as an example of that in my life.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. And
Mm,
what I'm hearing is a decision that you had to make, and you drew on your values, and
mm,
and your values superseded any form of hierarchy or process that you're supposed to adhere to. And I suppose this is um, an appropriate time to ask you that, we're living in a bit of a crazy time at the moment. We have no previous benchmark to go on. This is new for so many of us. How do you maintain your integrity? How do you continue to draw on your values and beliefs in a time that is so tumultuous? I want to flip the lid on your brain and your mind.
yeah,
And
a- absolutely. And I think it's easy, and I think we may have alluded to this earlier, but it's easy to talk resilience when everything's going smooth, and easy to talk
mm,
about these concepts when everything's going well. But I just think it's so essential to go back to your core beliefs and your core values in times like this, and whatever mantras you use, whatever your motivations are that get you out of bed on Monday morning to attack this for another week. I just think it's literally a conscious effort to go back to those and revisit them in a very mindful way.
mm,
And I think that's really what it comes down to, is it's not necessarily going to be intuitive in the current environment for you to kind of be able to stick with what's worked for you in the day-to-day life when things are cruising along as per normal.
mm,
And so I would say, to your point, it's mindfulness. It's going back to what your core values or beliefs are, and consciously kind
mhm.
of thinking about them, and in a very, in a very real way, and kind of building your days around that. Interestingly enough,
Yeah.
this is something that was shared with one of my former colleagues in the military, that in some ways our lives right now are a little bit like being in the deployed in the war zone, and in that, particularly in the rescue community, we had these really intense moments where we were, going into combat to pull someone out. But most of the time we were just sitting there on alert on the base, and every day was kind
Mm,
of groundhog day, and we didn't really have much of a difference between Tuesdays and Saturdays or whatever. So it was, how do you balance making each day count while still keeping one eye on the light at the end of the tunnel, and being so,
yeah.
like, looking forward to, gosh, when life gets back to normal and you can do all the things that you enjoy. And I think there's so many parallels to what we're going through right now, because I think it's important to, man, I can't wait to be able to hug my buddy again, and
Mm,
go to the footy game, whatever the case may be. But then
mm,
I think that's equally balanced with, okay, how do I make today count? How do I make this day that's not a whole lot different than yesterday in many ways? I'm still going to be sitting in my living room by and large. How do I make that,
mm.
matter, I guess, so that's, I think, the key thing here is just to be mindful of your core values and beliefs, and try to apply those to the max extent possible to whatever you have going on that day.
Yeah, it's that's so interesting because I just posted an article this morning on LinkedIn about my business partner Anne, who sort of had a huge battle with an ice cream last night, and this
Hmm.
whole thing around, oh, bugger it, let's just drink the wine and eat the high carbs and give in to this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Let's just binge on Netflix. And but I think, and there is a balance between giving yourself permission to get used to the new normal. But I think, what you're saying is so important, is that, this day, today is another day I've been gifted on this planet. How can I
Absolutely.
make the most of it?
It's
Yeah.
absolutely the case. And what you allude to there in terms of balance, I think, is essential as well too, because I think the reality is we're in a weird existence right now. So to occasionally give yourself permission to have that tub. I
Mm.
think I did have a tub of Haagen Dazs in 2 day setting there recently or whatever. And, I think, sometimes to do things like that, I think, are important too. But it's, like so many things in life. I think it's a balance for sure.
Mm. Wow.
Mm.
That was a wonderful detour. Thank you.
Right on.
I just sort of going cruising back towards influence. It's really interesting when I hear the word influence, I
Hmm.
just tend to automatically default to the negative. Now we're both speakers, and
Sure.
in Australia you have a lot of what they call platform speakers, so they speakers who are selling from the stage, and it's like they've just devoured Robert Cialdini's Principles of Influence book. It's like, this offer is only available today for the first 5 people who run to the back of the room, and we'll give you a 99% discount on a severely inflated price, or something like that.
S-
um,
Sure.
how can you help me to reframe that perception of influence? Because I don't like having that connection in my brain between influence and manipulation. What does it mean to you, Bill?
It's interesting because when you mention that, there's absolutely that connotation that I tend to lean towards sometimes. The other one is more around, I immediately turn to my mentors and my role models, and for me, it's a short list of folks that really help me to kind of be the best version of myself, both personally and professionally, through the years. And man,
Mm.
going all the way back to my dad. My dad was a all the things I ended up loving as a young man. He was a pilot for 20 years as well. He loved football and music and sports and all these things that became who I was. Motorcycles, everything that I kind of dug as a
Mm.
young man was trying to be like my dad, like, and he was just someone I so much looked up to. And then I think of, you know a gentleman that was just a couple years older than me at university, when I was at the Air Force Academy, that I tried to emulate and learn from, and just different bosses through the years too, that I was like, wow, those are people that I want to try to be like. And
Mm.
that to me is, what I kind of harken back to when I'm trying to be the best leader I can be, is what were
Yeah.
the kind of the skill sets that these individuals espoused that I valued so much, and tried to remember those, and to the max extent, although I'll never be those individuals, to take little bits and pieces from each of them, and hopefully
Mm.
become the best leader I can be, at the end of the day. And that's really the biggest thing I do, with the different opportunities I've had to join you for events, Claire. I've learned something from each of them, and I've tried to be a better leader as a result of those. And that's the thing.
Mm.
If you have the luxury of being around other quality leaders, there's little things you can take from each of them, and that's the thing that I think about when I think of influence, is what mattered to me from my mentors and role models and made me better, and how can I
Yeah.
take those and put them together and become the most effective leader I can be.
And as such a good reminder to us all. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot here, but what are some of
Mm,
the qualities that your dad had, that your Air
mhm,
Force Academy mentor
mhm.
had? What were some of the qualities that they had that influenced you to be the best person that you could be? What was it about them?
Mhm. Yep. There's so many, but and this is funny. This is one of the other questions that we had kind of discussed earlier, but I think they espouse them, so it kind of naturally segues in that a little bit. Is like the key things that they had, that I think are probably the most important things in terms of being an influential leader, are the values of surrounding
Mm,
trust and integrity. So if I had to pick kind of a couple key things, those would be them, and they had them in spades. And that's if they did the kind of the right things consistently. They were people that were just unabashedly pure in the way that they operated, both in their kind of day-to-day lives, and in the way they carried themselves in the workplace. And it just set such an awesome example, and you knew exactly what you're going to get there. The other thing is
yeah.
um, they both put a lot of trust in me, and gave me the opportunity to, I guess, be, you know just give it a go, I guess, in many ways. And I
Hmm.
just think that's such an important thing as a leader. I speak a lot about the trust that we needed to have each other in the helicopter. There is there's something called a one wheel hover, where we were doing a rescue mission on like the side of a ridge, for example, and there wasn't a landing zone large enough to set down the entire helicopter. Oftentimes we'd execute these
Oh,
missions
great.
in the middle of the night with night vision goggles, and oftentimes under fire. So it was just, uh, if for example, if it was a one wheel hover with the left side of the aircraft commander actually sits in the right side of the bird. We literally couldn't see what the heck was going on over there, and we
Ah,
literally had our lives in the hands of the scanner. He would call us, you know back two, down three, left one, to a spot, and if we didn't have unequivocal trust in him, we would hit the side of the mountain. And so
my
that
heart's
that kind
racing
of
as you're speaking.
yeah, yeah, it's just it's pretty wild to think back on that, because this concept of unequivocal trust stems back again from my childhood with my dad, but it was kind of just, it grew in terms of what I needed to be able to do in my career, in my career as a helicopter pilot. So back to your original point, these people had that in spades, and it was
Mm,
integrity and trust was kind of the cornerstone of what what I valued so much in them. And the
yeah,
other thing
yeah.
too, and I kind of alluded to this a couple times, is I just felt with them and with a couple other leaders thinking about through the years, is they really try to do what was kind of best for me, and they weren't afraid, if it was a little bit outside the box. I can remember another leader, when I was, this is, when it was? It was when I lost my family members, and it was back in
Hmm.
2010, and I had kind of one tour left in the military. So basically, we would do like 3-year tours. And the time I was living in Hawaii, and most of my family was kind of located in and around Washington D.C. And I just remember calling my old boss, who was based in DC. We had been stationed together many years prior, and I'm like, my helicopter that I was flying at the time, that was I was still a Black Hawk guy, or a Pavehawk guy at that point. And
Hmm.
like, I know we don't have any Pavehawks in DC, but I need to get back home. My family needs me right
Hmm.
now. I happen to be the executor for the wills of my my parents, and I needed to sort a
Hmm.
bunch of stuff out for my family. I just needed to get back home. And I'm like, I know that's it's non-linear. The kind of the assignments guys don't have a job for me there, but I need to get back home. And he did it, and he found a way to, like, kind of think outside the box to get me a role back in DC, and it ended up being so important to me, and I guess these qualities that these influential leaders have, it's around trust, it's around integrity, but it's around true empathy and concern for those people under their watch. And I think those three things combined just make you someone that you want to follow. We talk about following someone in a battle. You just want to, whatever your job is, you want to
Yeah.
follow them. And that's the thing that I've always kind of been, tried to be to the max extent possible, is the sort of individual that people want to be a part of, that thing, that you've created.
I think you've just unequivocally reframed the concept of influence for me. Thank you.
Yeah,
And,
right on.
for those, I don't know if you can hear outside, they've just started mowing the lawn, so you'll just have to put up with it because I'm not stopping this podcast for anything.
That's awesome.
One of the things that, in listening to your story, one of the things that came up that again I think is an element of leading in an uncertain world, Bill, is how do you, and whether that's in the culture of Salesforce or your own leadership culture, how do you deal with mistakes and failure, both for yourself and your people? I mean, you know, that story that you just shared with us, that
Hmm.
a mistake there costs lives.
Sure.
And obviously you can get perspective on that. But if it's
Mm,
not a life, a life costing type mistake,
yeah.
how do you help your people fail fast and fail forward, or whatever it is that you do?
One of the things, and this goes back to the Air Force stuff too. And again, I mentioned it at the beginning of our discussion, Claire, that there's so many parallels and so many things I learned from
Yeah.
that first half that have helped me in the corporate world. This is another one of them. We had it's a kind of a military tradition. Every office has its squadron bar or whatever. So on Fridays we'd turn on the beer light. It was literally one of those cheesy neon signs, that said the bar was open, and we'd all gather around and have a beverage and kind of talk about our week, and share what we called "there I was" stories. There I was, in this dogfight or whatever the case may be, like, talking about a mission that had been flown that week and lessons learned from it. And that included successes, for absolute sure, but also failures and mistakes that were made. And
Mm,
it gave us the opportunity to kind of learn from each other, so that ideally we could replicate things that went well, and
yeah.
also to kind of learn from each other's missteps, so that we wouldn't make the same missteps again, and we didn't need to go through them personally. And
Yeah.
it created this kind of environment where people felt comfortable to share those with each other, and in as much, again, help each other be better. And I've tried to
Mm,
carry that forward with my current kind of professional life too, where we absolutely do that now in the office, and we share
yeah.
those "there I was" stories, both for successes and failures. So I think is again, like so much of the stuff we talked about earlier, is being kind of raw and vulnerable
Mm,
in your personal life. I think it's also, you
mm,
could argue, in your professional life, it's that same rawness and vulnerability, that if you kind of lead with that, and oftentimes it's sharing my own mistakes, and being able to say, hey, this is something I could have done better, and I messed up, and I learned from. And I think it
yeah.
gives people permission, almost in that setting, to do the same. And then people are just kind of grateful of that. And the other thing too is, I also think that we've created an environment where, in many times, we'll have those conversations amongst, I have 9 direct reports.
Mm-hmm.
there's times my boss will join us for a lot of our meetings, but there's times I respectfully ask him not to join because I just want people to feel safe with our little group, I guess, because
Yeah.
oftentimes they may feel comfortable sharing in a smaller setting than they would
Yeah.
with a wider audience. And I think it's important to balance that too and make sure that when you create that environment where people share their failures, they feel kind of comfortable with whatever the setting is. And in as much they know they're not going to be kind of judged by any way, shape, or form, but actually kind of celebrated for helping other people out.
Yeah. I think you just hit the
Mm-hmm.
nail on the head in terms of another
Mm-hmm.
pillar of I think I'm going to rename this podcast "Leading with Integrity" because that's what it's been about from beginning to end.
Right on.
Is
Mm-hmm.
creating that psychologically safe environment for people, and
Exactly.
you would have had to have done that throughout your career because no one could afford to cover up a mistake, I suppose.
No, and again, I think a lot of times when you're dealing with literally life and death situations, you develop habits that absolutely pertain just as much to the more day to day challenges we face. But
Mm,
if you kind of apply the same concepts there, then you're never going to
mm.
go wrong. I think, and then that's kind of what I've tried to espouse for sure.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Sure.
what's
Yep.
what's an area of leadership that you
Hmm.
still haven't ticked the box on that you still want to develop in? I mean, obviously there'll be lots of areas. We never tick the box to say
Sure.
that we're the perfect leader. But what's one maybe that you
Absolutely.
struggle with, Bill?
Um, it's probably the doing the tough stuff, like meaning that like when you're delivering difficult news
Mm,
or having to kind of correct someone, or even worse if you ever get to a point, and I've been blessed thus far, I haven't quite got there, but where you have to
hmm.
let someone go because they're not performing to a standard that's required of the organization. I'm just such a people person. I'm not afraid to say it. I love my teammates. I love the people on my team.
Yeah,
Like so
yeah.
sometimes it's difficult for me to deliver hard news, and particularly if someone's not performing up to standards um, to deliver that sort of information to them.
Hmm.
So it's an ongoing challenge for me to kind of to figure out the best way to do that so that it's effective, and we get the kind of behavioral changes that are required there, but
Mm.
in such a way that they never forget that they're cared about as a person. And that's really what I always come back to is I think that no matter what happens, people know that, and that's how I need to almost I think almost give myself permission to deliver difficult news, and to realize that I've earned that almost like kind of respect that they know I care about them as a human,
Absolutely.
and that but it's again it's probably the area of you know most significant growth for me is to be able to
Mm.
deliver that difficult news when it's needed in the professional world, because it is at the end of the day there's times things don't always go smoothly, and it's how do you deliver it in a way that's going to be received well and is not going to be taken personally, is something that's always a challenge, I think.
I think that's a huge lesson. I think you can still deliver difficult
Mm,
news empathically. Um,
definitely.
and I think it's that empathy, and I think you have that in bucket spades. And if ever I wanted to hear bad news, I think you'd be the
Yeah.
first person I'd choose to hear it from.
No, I
Oh my
appreciate
goodness,
that. Hmm,
I
hmm.
could talk to you all day. This has been so enlightening, and I just really want to thank you for your authenticity in your stories, both from your professional and your personal life. And I think I'm probably going to rush to get this podcast out sooner than I was planning to, because I think the messages that you've got, Bill, are so pertinent for what we're going through at the moment. So
Well,
if
thank you so
you
much,
know,
Claire.
oh, you're so very welcome. And if there was, I don't know, one or two key messages. I know we've had wonderful threads throughout the whole of the podcast, but if there was
Yeah.
one or two messages that you could leave our listeners with that might help
Hmm.
them in how they're leading their people with integrity, what would your little nuggets of sage advice be to them?
Sure. This is going to sound kind of morbid when I say it initially, but bear with me. So it's actually a
Mhm.
quote from a former American Indian chief. So this is back in the day, back in the 1800s, early 1800s, and before he kind of went into battle, he would have the cry that he would say, "Today is a good day to die. Follow me." And what he meant by that basically is he was at peace with who he was as a person, so that whatever happened to him that day, he had no regrets about where he was at as a human, where he was at with his
Mm.
relationships, where he had nothing left unsaid to his mom, to his dad, to his siblings, to his coworkers. They knew who he was and what he stood for. It's another poem that we used to recite when I was at the Air Force Academy, called "The Man in the Glass," that kind of followed that same concept, that you can't fool the man in the glass when you look in the mirror. And again, just being
Do
at
you
peace
have
with who
that
you are,
poem
what
to
you stand
hand,
for.
Bill?
I absolutely do. I'll pass it on to you because it's one of those deals that I just think
Thank you.
resonates so heavily with me. You just because it's the whole concept of it is you can fool the whole world, but you can never fool the person on the other side of the mirror.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
if you're at peace with who you are as a person, and what you stand for, again, to our what ended up being the theme of this talk at the end of the day, if you can kind of lead with integrity,
yeah.
then you can go through almost anything, and that's really what it comes back to me.
Oh, what? Yeah, yeah, you do. You've influenced me in this podcast. Um, I feel strong. I feel resilient. I feel competent. You know, I'm a bit lost for words, but that's just me being authentic at the moment as well. Probably I'm a bit
Right
emotional
on.
too.
Right on. Well,
So
right on, Clara.
thank you so much, Bill. I really appreciate the time that we've had, and I could go on. And one of the themes through the whole conversation that you talk so much about being grateful, and I can see that you're a person of huge gratitude, and I'm so very grateful that you decided to spend the time with us today. Go well, stay well, and we'll see you on the other side of all this.
That sounds great, Clara, and thanks again so much for the opportunity.
You're so very welcome, Bill. Bye bye.
Bye bye.